Welcome back for day 24 of becoming more well read. Officially halfway through Steve Jobs. Um, I think this chapter is chapter 23, so we almost lined up with the days. But chapter of this one is going to be the second coming. What rough beast is our come round at last. But pretty much looking at this, just kind of curious. Like Steve, reading about Steve. He's obviously accomplished a lot with being at Apple the first time, getting fired, um, starting next. Hasn't really got that up and running yet, but was at Pixar, had some success there as well. But you know, who, what makes someone who's already been so successful want to chase more? I think that's what I'm curious just from looking at the title of this chapter. But page 293, we can just hop right into it. Um, Steve Jobs, 1996. Things fall apart. When Jobs unveiled the next computer in 1988, there was a burst of excitement. That fizzled when the computer finally went on sale the following year. Jobs' ability to dazzle, intimidate, and spin the press began to fail him, and there was a series of stories on the company's woes. Next is incompatible with other computers at a time when the industry is moving toward interchangeable systems. Bart Sigler of Associated Press reported. Because relatively little software exists to run on Next, it has a hard time attracting customers. Next tried to reposition itself as the leader in a new category, personal workstations. For people who wanted the power of a workstation and the friendliness of a personal computer, but those customers were by now buying them from the fast-growing Sun Microsystems. Revenues for Next in 1990 were $28 million. Sun made 2.5 billion that year. IBM abandoned its deal to license the Next software, so Jobs was forced to do something against his nature. Despite his ingrained belief that hardware and software should be integrally linked, he agreed in January 1992 to license the Next Step operating system to run on other computers. One surprising defender of Jobs was Jean-Louis Gassi, who had bumped elbows with Jobs when he replaced him at Apple and subsequently been ousted himself. He wrote an article extolling the creativity of Next products. Next might not be Apple, Gassi argued, but Steve is still Steve. Is still Steve. A few days later, his wife answered a knock on the door and went running upstairs to tell him that Jobs was standing there. He thanked Gassi for the article and invited him to an event where Intel's Andy Grove would join Jobs in announcing that NextStep would be ported to the IBM Intel platform. I sat next to Steve. I sat next to Steve's father, Paul Jobs, a movingly dignified individual. Gassi recalled, he raised a difficult son, but he was proud and happy to see him on stage with Andy Grove. A year later, Jobs took the inevitable subsequent step. He gave up making the hardware altogether. This was a painful decision, just as it had been when he gave up making hardware at Pixar. He cared about all aspects of his products, but the hardware was a particular passion. He was energized by great design. Obsessed over manufacturing details, and would spend hours watching his robots make perfect machines. But now he had to lay off more than half his workforce, sell his beloved factory to Canon, which auctioned off the fancy furniture, and satisfy himself with a company that tried to license an operating system to manufacturers of uninspired machines. By the mid 1990s, Jobs was finding some pleasure in his new family life and his astonishing triumph in the movie business, but he despaired about the personal computer industry. Innovation has virtually ceased, he told Gary Wolf of Wired at the end of 1995. Microsoft Microsoft dominates with very little innovation. Apple lost. The desktop market has entered the dark ages. He was also gloomy in an interview with Tony Perkins and the editors of Red Herring. First, he displayed the bad Steve side of his personality soon after Perkins and his colleagues arrived. Jobs slipped out the back door for a walk, and he didn't return for 45 minutes. When the magazine's photographer began taking pictures, he snapped at her sarcastically and made her stop. Perkins later noted manipulation, selfishness, or downright rudeness. We couldn't figure out the motivation behind his madness. When he finally settled down for the interview, he said that he said that even the advent of the web would do little to stop Microsoft's domination. Windows has won, he said. It beat the Macintosh. It beat the Mac. Unfortunately, it beat Unix. It beat OS2, an inferior product won. Apple falling. For a few years after Jobs was ousted, Apple was able to coast comfortably with a high profit margin based on its temporary dominance in desktop publishing. Feeling like a genius back in 1987, John Sculley had made a series of proclamations that nowadays sound embarrassing. Jobs wanted Apple to become a wonderful consumer products company, Sculley wrote. This was a lunatic plan. Apple would never be a consumer products company. We couldn't bend reality to all our dreams of changing the world. High tech could not be designed and sold as a consumer product. Jobs was appalled and he became angry and contemptuous as Sculley presided over a steady decline in market share for Apple in the early 1990s. Sculley destroyed Apple by bringing in corrupt people and corrupt values, Jobs later lamented. They cared about making money, for themselves mainly, and also for Apple, rather than making great products. He felt that Sculley's drive for profits came at the expense of gaining market share. Macintosh lost to the Microsoft because Sculley insisted on milking all the profits he could get rather than improving the product and making it affordable. As a result, the profits eventually disappeared. It had taken Microsoft a few years to replicate Macintosh's graphical user interface, but by 1990 it had come out with Windows 3.0, which began the company's march to dominance in the desktop market. Windows 95, which was released in 1995, became the most successful operating system ever, and Macintosh sales began to collapse. Microsoft simply ripped off what other people did. Jobs later said, Apple deserved it. After I left, it didn't invent anything new. The Mac hardly improved. It was a sitting duck. It was a sitting duck for Microsoft. His frustration with Apple was evident when he gave a talk to a Stanford business school club at the home of a student who asked him to sign a Macintosh keyboard. Jobs agreed to do so if he could remove the keys that had been added to the Mac after he left. He pulled out his car keys and pried off the four arrow cursor keys, which he had once banned, as well as the top row of F1, F2, F3 function keys. I'm changing the world one keyboard at a time, he deadpanned. Then he signed the multi-lated keyboard. During his 1995 Christmas vacation in Kona Village, Hawaii, Jobs went walking along the beach with his friend Larry Ellison, the irrepressible Oracle chairman. They discussed making a takeover bid for Apple and restoring Jobs as its head. Ellison said he could line up $3 billion in financing. I will buy Apple. You will get 25% of it right away for being CEO, and we can restore it to its past glory. But Jobs demurred. I decided I'm not a hostile takeover kind of guy, he explained. If they had asked me to come back, it might have been different. By 1996, Apple's share of the market had fallen to 4% from a high of 16% in the late 1980s. Michael Spindler, the German-born chief of Apple's European operations, who had replaced Sculley as CEO in 1993, tried to sell the company to Sun, IBM, and Hewlett-Packard. That failed, and he was ousted in February 1996 and replaced by Gil Amelio, a research engineer who was CEO of National Semiconductor. During his first year, the company lost $1 billion, and the stock price, which had been $70 in 1991, fell to $14, even as the tech bubble was pushing other stocks into the stratosphere. Amelio was not a fan of Jobs. Their first meeting had been in 1994, just after Amelio was elected to the Apple board. Jobs had called him and announced, I want to come over and see you. Amelio invited him over to his office at National Semiconductor, and he later recalled watching through the glass wall of his office as Jobs arrived. He looked rather like a boxer, aggressive and elusively graceful, or like an elegant jungle cat ready to spring at his prey. After a few minutes of pleasantries, far more than Jobs usually engaged in, he abruptly announced the reason for his visit. He wanted Amelio to help him return to Apple as a CEO. There's only one person who can rally the Apple troops, Jobs said. Only one person who can straighten out the company. The Macintosh era had passed. Jobs argued, and it was now time for Apple to create something new that was just that was just as that was just as innovative. If the Mac is dead, what's going to replace it? Emilio asked. Jobs' reply didn't impress him. Steve didn't seem to have a clear answer. Emilio later said he seemed to have a set of one-liners. Emilio felt he was witnessing Jobs' reality distortion field and was proud to be immune to it. He shooed Jobs unceremoniously out of his office. By the summer of 1996, Emilio realized that he had a serious problem. Apple was pinning its hopes on creating a new operating system called Copland. But Emilio had discovered soon after becoming CEO that it was a bloated piece of vaporware that would not solve Apple's needs for better networking and memory protection, nor would it be ready to ship as scheduled in 1997. He publicly promised that he would quickly find an alternative. His problem was that he didn't have one, so Apple needed a partner, one that could make a stable operating system, preferably one that was Unix-like and had an object-oriented application layer. There was one company that could obviously supply such software next, but it would take a while for Apple to focus on it. Apple first homed in on a company that had been started by Jean-Louis Gassi called BE, like B. Gassi began negotiating the sale of B to Apple, but in August 1996, he overplayed his hand at a meeting with Emilio in Hawaii. He said he wanted to bring his 50-person team to Apple, and he asked for 15% of the company, worth about $500 million. Emilio was stunned. Apple calculated that B was worth about $50 million. After a few offers and counteroffers, Gassi refused the budget after demanding at least $275 million. He thought that Apple had no alternatives. It got back to Emilio that Gassi said, "I've got them by the balls and I'm going to squeeze until it hurts." This did not please Emilio. Apple's chief technology officer, Ellen Hancock, argued for going with Sun's Unix-based SolarX operating system, even though it did not yet have a friendly user interface. Emilio began to favor using, of all things, Microsoft's Windows NT, which he felt could be rejiggered on the surface to look and feel just like a Mac, while being compatible with the wide range of software available to Windows users. Bill Gates, eager to make a deal, began personally calling Emilio. There was, of course, one other option. 2 years earlier, Macworld magazine columnist and former Apple software evangelist Guy Kawasaki had published a parody press release joking that Apple was buying Next and making Jobs its CEO. In the spoof, Mike Mercula asked Jobs, "Do you want to spend the rest of your life selling Unix with uh, asked Jobs, "Do you want to spend the rest of your life selling Unix with a sugar coating, or change the world?" Jobs responded, "Because I'm now a father, I needed a steadier source of income." The release noted that because of his experience at Next, he is expected to bring a newfound sense of humility back to Apple. It also quoted Bill Gates as saying there would now be more innovations from Jobs than Microsoft could copy. Everything in the press release was meant as a joke, of course, but reality has an odd habit of catching up with satire. All right. Gonna end there on page 298. Um, Slouching toward Cupertino. Computer's about to die. Um, I think I got a little bit of my answer as far as what makes somebody who's already had some success continue to chase, or not even chase, but continue to pour into. He's not even necessarily after success, but what makes him just keep trying to strive for success after you obtain so much. Um, I'm gonna get through that chapter and then see what I come back with after that. But yeah, this is day 24, becoming more red. If you tapped in, um, appreciate it. Rest in peace, Kobe Bryant, 2-4. You know what I'm saying?